This is the third assignment for Anatomy and Physiology. It was out on the 4th of December and it is due in on the 22nd of December, which is the Friday of half term. It's really important you meet that deadline. The reason being is that I need to mark it and be able to come back after half term or after Christmas break and provide you with the feedback so that we are moving on to assignment 4, because we need to get closure of the unit and we have limited time to do that. So it's absolutely essential you meet this deadline. Here's the criteria, and I'll talk to you about it. Effectively, the first bit talks about labelling the diagram of the heart. It's got to be a hand-drawn label diagram, and it's got to label all these components here. You then need to describe and explain each of these components. You then move on and you describe and explain the blood vessels. Okay, so arteries, arterioles, capillaries, veins, and venules. And then you describe and explain the functions of the cardiovascular system. Where you can, link sports examples where possible. You then move on to the respiratory system. Again, you need to do a hand-drawn diagram of the respiratory system and label it up. The labels consist of these here, so these are the components that you need to label up. You then need to describe and explain each of these components in detail. Finally, what you'll do is you'll describe and explain the functions of the respiratory system in as much detail as you can. Okay, the more detail you put, the more likely you're to achieve a merit criteria as opposed to a pass. What we do is we'll move through. It's done on a template, so if you keep going through the brief, what you'll find is we get to this page here, and what you'll have is, when you first open this, you'll see a picture of a heart. The first thing to do is to delete that picture out. Okay, once you've deleted that picture out, you need to put your own hand-drawn diagram in. So I'm going to insert a photo. I've actually used Megan Barnes' photo. So on my desktop, I know I've got a picture of a heart. This is Megan's. So what I'll do is, it needs to be a picture of your own heart. Okay, so if your picture's of Megan's, that's not okay. It needs to be your picture. So I'll just crop it, and the reason why I'll crop it is because I need to create some more space. It's really important that the picture's clear, because if the picture's clear, I can't tell you whether you've actually met the criteria or not, because I won't be able to see the labels. In this case, we know that Megan's is a nice big picture. I can see each of the labels. I can see that she's labelled everything that she needs to label, and you can just check that off against the list up here in the brief. So if we go back, what you can do is tick through them to make sure your diagram's got each of these things labelled. But I know that Megan's is absolutely correct, so I've looked at it in advance. Once we've done that, we move on to the next task, which is this bit here, and it's a table. So the first bit is to describe the structure, describe and explain the structure. So here I've talked about the atriums. The atriums are the top chambers of the heart. Their walls are thinner than ventricles. They are positioned above the ventricles and have valves below them to control blood flow. You can find 2 atriums in the heart, one on the left and one on the right. And then I've explained the function. The right atrium is responsible for receiving deoxygenated blood from the vena cava, and the left atrium is responsible for receiving oxygenated blood from the pulmonary vein. The atriums then contract and allow blood to flow through the valves and into the ventricles. There's my description and explanation of the atrias. What you need to do is then go on and describe and explain each of these components in as much detail, and you should have a handout from the lesson that tells you exactly what you need to do. What you have to be careful with, and I can't impress this enough, is that you must make sure the work is your own. Okay, so if you've got something and you need to rework it or reword it, please make sure you do it, because there's a plagiarism scanner, and if your work comes back and it says, look, it's copied from so and so, or it's copied from a book, I will not accept it. It'll mean you have to do it all again. Okay, so don't waste your time in doing that. Make sure it's yours from the start. So this table needs to be completed. You then move on to the next task, which is what you'll see here is actually, and I'll show you what I did, is there's a bit of writing. You need to delete the writing out, and then you need to find an image. So I found on Google this image. All I did is I copied it, okay, and I pasted it in here just to show the vessels. I'll just make it a bit smaller because I don't need it overly large. It's clear that it's got the vein, venule, capillaries, arteriole and arteries labelled up, which are the 5 that I'm going to be talking about. Okay. And then I've provided a description and explanation of the arteries. So I've said that arteries have thick elastic muscular walls, which creates a smaller lumen. This smaller lumen means blood pressure is far greater in the arteries. The thick elastic wall enables arteries to expand when blood flow is increased. Increased blood flow may be due to exercise because the heart is required to pump more blood at a faster rate to the muscles. Arteries can carry blood away from the heart. Arteries carry blood away from the heart. The largest artery in the body is the aorta, which is responsible for distributing blood from the heart to the body to provide oxygenated blood and nutrients to the working muscles. Arteries carry oxygenated blood, however, there is one exception to the rule, which is the pulmonary artery. This carries deoxygenated blood from the heart back to the lungs. And there's my description and explanation of arteries. You do the same with arterioles, the same with capillaries, the same with veins, and the same with venules. The more detail you add, the more likely you are to meet the merit criteria. Okay, it is an expectation that they're paragraphs, not a couple of lines, because there's lots of information that we can write about. Once we've done that, we move on to the functions of the cardiovascular system. So you can see each of these functions here. Each need a paragraph clearly describing and explaining their functions. So oxygen here, delivery of oxygen. Oxygen is inhaled and then distributed from the lungs to the blood vessels via gaseous exchange. Oxygen is attracted to hemoglobin, which is a protein. Once oxygen has attached on, it becomes oxyhemoglobin. Hemoglobin is a protein and is red in colour and binds onto red blood cells. The red blood cells are the transport mechanism that carries oxyhemoglobin to the muscles to drop off oxygen so they can function. Okay, so I'm talking about the delivery of oxygen and nutrients. I then do the same with the removal of waste products. With thermoregulation, you're required to describe and explain thermoregulation, vasoconstriction, and vasodilation. So make sure you cover all three aspects of that. And then the function of blood, so how oxygen is transported, very similar to this here. Clotting, in terms of how clotting takes place, and fighting infection. Okay. We then move on to the respiratory system. Okay, so I can show you what I need to do. I need to delete both of those images out, and the reason being is because those images are not mine. I need to put in my labeled diagrams that I did in lesson. So I know I've got two diagrams somewhere. I'll put my photo 1 in, which is that one. And you might have to do some playing around here, so I'll put it in front of text just so I can move it around a bit. And I need to make it big enough so I can see it, obviously, to be able to mark it. So that's not too bad, I can see that. And then I probably need the other one in. And I'll take my picture 2, and I'll put that in there. And again, what I'll need to do here is probably put it in front of text and just move it around a little bit so that it's in position, but Alex can see my diagram and see what's labelled up. And if you need 2 pages, use 2 pages if that's what you need. But at the moment, I can see each thing that's labelled up here. I can clearly read it. Probably need to make that a bit bigger, if anything. And I can then mark it and see that you've covered each of the components. Again, the components are in the brief. So if we go up to the brief, all of the components that are required to be covered in the respiratory system are listed here, so you can tick them off to make sure that they're labelled on your diagram. Go back down to where we came from. So I know I've done that bit. I then do this bit, okay? And again, it's similar to the heart. You describe the structure and the function of each of the components of the respiratory system. I know we've done this at length in lesson, so again it's really important that the work's your own and it's not somebody else's or not taken from a book, so make sure you rework it. And then finally, you've got to do the functions of the respiratory system, so gaseous exchange, describe and explain it, mechanics of breathing including inspiration and expiration, lung volumes, that includes tidal volume, vital capacity and residual volume, and then control of breathing, neural and chemical. What you need to make sure is actually when you start typing in here that I would probably pick a font, because otherwise it will do that blue font and you want to kind of separate that. So I pick Arial Narrow, turn it black, and then when I type it in, it's not the same, so it looks separate. Just be mindful of that. That is the entire assignment. Everything we've got on here we have covered in lessons, so you shouldn't be without information. It is really important that you meet this deadline, which I talked about at the start, the 22nd of December, which is a Friday. That gives me an opportunity to mark it over Christmas, and I can get it back to you before we come back. Any questions, please feel free to email me. I hope that's been useful. I'll leave you with it, and good luck with it.